Prototype testing is a valuable step in the product or service development process. Whether it's through co-ideation in development, or to align a product or service with the needs of its users, or to discover and define business opportunities for existing services or products, prototype testing can help companies learn a lot about how real users interact with products and services in a real-world situation. Hello, my name is Duncan McGregor, the Marketing and Communications Coordinator at Insightrix Research in Saskatoon, Canada, and your podcast host. On today's episode, we're joined by Ben Jacobson, partner at Conifer Research, a design research consultancy in Chicago. Conifer Research is a company that works in prototype testing, having worked across a wide swath of industries with the design and innovation teams from companies like BP, McDonald's, Nestle Purina, Pepsi, and Samsung. In this episode, Ben shares some of his experiences in prototype testing, how it's benefited Conifer Research clients, and Ben relates some of the techniques that his company has employed in the past to get their clients the insight they need. Ben also talks about where he thinks the field of prototype testing, and market research in general, is heading, and then offers some suggestions for anybody looking to dive into the field. And for this episode of the podcast, our own research director, Lang McGilp, sits in as the co-host, lending his experience and research acumen to the discussion. Do's and don'ts of prototype research, observational research versus big data, and humanizing top box scores. All that and more in this episode of Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix Podcast. Hello, we've got Ben Jacobson from Conifer Research from out of Chicago on the phone. How's it going today, Ben?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on. I've also got our own...
Thank you very much for having me, yeah.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. I've also got our own research director here at Insightrix, Lang McGilp, on the phone to co-host. So thanks for joining us. So Ben is a partner at Conifer Research, a research agency who does a lot of work in prototype testing. This isn't something we usually do a lot of here at Insightrix, so we wanted to have him on to talk about his company and the work you guys do. Is there anything you could tell us about Conifer Research and the types of prototype testing you do?
Sure. My first question would be, why don't you do prototype testing up there? But besides that, my little company got started in 2001, and we really got started in all of this. I'm just going to give a shout out to one of our first patron clients, who back in the day was Steelcase Incorporated, run by a visionary CEO whose name is Jim Hackett. And Jim Hackett, of course, is now the CEO of Ford. And they have long sponsored, observational research and ethnographic research, both for, new concept development, but also testing, all the different iterations of the designs that they do. And so, we specialize in observational research, in-context interviewing, those sorts of things, which has a wide variety of uses, one of which is certainly prototype testing. And so that's really the first way that we got into it.
Right on. How do you find prototype testing benefits your clients? I know it's a pretty broad question, but what are the most common or key areas you usually help your clients with?
I guess the first thing to kind of wrap our brains around as we talk about this is that testing, the word prototype can mean almost anything, right?
Yeah.
It can literally mean some rubber bands and, paper clips and pipe cleaners and, things that you've made in an ideation session. It can be sketches and concepts. It can be a fully engineered and absolutely functioning piece of machinery, right? So the range of what falls into that is quite large. And we love to get involved in all of those aspects of it. We don't just specialize in one teeny tiny bit. And I guess the key thing to think about is that it's just dramatically cheaper, more interesting and insightful to identify the joys and pains that you're about to set loose in the world at a small scale rather than at market scale after launch, right? And so that is probably the number one thing that people out there who are thinking about this should keep in their mind, is that this is sort of something you absolutely should be doing. And I guess you said the other one was, how does it help my clients, right? Mm-hmm. Well, so I mentioned we save them valuable time and money by getting things as close to right as possible before they sink a lot of money into engineering and development. And I can tell you some stories about that later. But sometimes it even becomes obvious that an idea should be radically transformed, repositioned, or even killed outright based on what you can learn in a prototype test. And if you talk to people in business, this is probably the thing that, doesn't get accounted for very often, but should be, which is how many times did you save yourself from embarrassment in the market or, building something at scale and launching it, and then having to write it all off 2 quarters later, right? Things like that. And when you think about those epic fails, usually at the bottom of that is some kind of, vacuum when it came to really understanding how this was going to function in the real world. And I guess the third thing that I would add in this sort of basket of topics is it's really important to have a different set of eyes on the design and development as you move things from concepts into offerings out there in the world. If you let an internal design team or an external design firm who created the concept do the testing, it often, I think, just introduces a whole heck of a lot more bias into the process than I personally think is healthy.
Yeah, we do quite a bit of advertising concept kind of testing, and I find a similar approach where sometimes just being that extra party at the table that's not involved in creating or taking an idea and putting it into something for consumers to absorb, it gives you that chance to be a little more objective and that kind of thing, and ensure that what you're showing to people aligns with the intended outcome.
Oh yeah, Lang. I mean, and that gets multiplied, right? I mean, the multiplier effects on this are so interesting, right? So it's at the table, with your client and their stakeholders, et cetera. But even in the conduct of the research, if you're, if in any way, shape, or form, the people that are engaged in, a test or a concept test or anything like that have an idea about who this is for, and those people are sitting in the room, you immediately introduce this whole sense of, how do you please the people who are paying you and feeding you M&Ms, right?
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to get out of that unless it's really clear that you're an unbiased third party.
Interesting. Do you, and I wonder if the barriers might be the same in some of the work we do, but what are some of the challenges that you find with clients who maybe want to just take the phrase down and dirty, just something simple, give me the basic, or maybe I'm struggling to convince people to even bother with this and just move the chains down the field a little bit more on our own. What are some of those barriers that you find that you need to convince your client, or they need to convince their internal client, this is worth taking the time and a little bit of money to invest and figure things out?
Well, when you have the formula for that, will you let me know? Because,
right?
I think that would unlock a lot, right? So I guess there's a couple of things. One is I like to think about it as, really honest conversations with people. And it's hard to do when you don't even know them, right? When people send you an RFP through the email and they're asking for something, and you don't know them. And it's hard as well when you know someone. We have multi-year relationships with people, and they'll say, we want to do X, Y, and Z, and we'll say, that seems, like a good idea or a bad idea, but it's hard to, speak truth to the people who would write you a check. And I think we all have to, keep that in mind and, try to check our egos at the door and be as faithful as we can to what's the good, right, and true thing that should be happening. I like to remind people, or even just ask them in the form of questions, how much money are you spending to take this from let's say they use a stage gate or some crazy Scrum model or whatever, right? How much money are you spending to move the chains down the field? And how many times have you already done that without checking your assumptions or without exposing this to the people who are going to use it? Because the further you go, the more expensive that really is. And there's a ton of cost involved in that people think isn't real, right? And people will tell me all the time, they're like, oh, well, this is a innovation project and it has to come up with a new idea, a concept, a service, whatever, that has at least $100 million a year of incremental income, to the firm, right? And then I'm thinking, okay, $100 million is your goalpost, and you don't want to spend $100,000 to figure out whether or not you're moving in the right direction. And I think that they have their math. They went to business school. I didn't, right? But in my mind, there's definitely times and places along the way when you need to check things out and make sure that you're not making some goofy, horrible mistake. And the other part of it is not just the mistakes, but the opportunities to make it better, right? I mean, not just not bad, right?
Yeah.
But you can learn things along the way by, iterative processes that really amp up the quality and the experience of the final offering at the end. And if you think that you've got it all right from the Post-it note that you stuck on the conference room wall all the way through to launching something into the world, that's arrogance, and that kind of arrogance usually ends badly.
So can you give us an example or two if I've used your methodology to assist your clients?
Oh God, yeah. We could talk all day about that.
No, awesome.
I know you don't have that much time, but we'll talk about a few things and shut me up if I'm not making sense or
no worries.
Causing you pain or anything like that, right? So here's a fun one. And it's an oldie but a goodie, right? So those are kind of fun. So we helped a large, not to be named department store brand do a test of some price check machines. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you bet.
Those little scanners, they're all through the store, and you slide the barcode under there and it says, this is cost XYZ, right? So first you have to realize that price check machines were not even close to a new thing in the world when we were doing this.
Okay.
All their competitors had them. And so it was an internal emotional problem that they were having with making the decision to roll these out to all of their stores. And so, on the good side, it was really easy for them to put their hands on some functional prototypes and put them in a store, which they chose to do literally in a small town in Oklahoma so nobody would find out, right? And so, we put these into 5 different formats of their stores, and which at the time was like overkill, right? Like, why do you need to go to that length? But they were insistent that they had to do this, and they were worried that the machines would disrupt their shoppers and change their usual purchase behavior or even cause confusion. So we set up the machines in real store environments using fixed video cameras to record behavior and interaction with the machines. We hung around in the various departments. After people used the machines, we would approach them and interview them about the experience of using the machine, et cetera, et cetera. So that was fairly straightforward. But it got really, really interesting when things started going down the road, right? So the thing is that on these machines, they had, of course, a little small screen to display the price and some information. They had the scanner with a funky little laser. And oddly enough, they had a series of simple little black buttons on the front. And the buttons had no function. But if you pushed them, they went beep.
No way.
So
I wish I could get the right beep, right? But
Yeah.
it was a charming little beep, and et cetera. So, but nothing would happen, right? It just went beep. So when you present people with a button, many of them will push it, right? And
my kids do that to me all the time.
Yeah.
Of course, right? That's how they learn the power button on every device in your home before they're 1 year old, right? Because they just are going to push the button. They've seen you push buttons. They want to push the buttons. You can imagine what the kids in the store were. They were going crazy with the buttons, right? But either way, when someone pushes a button, they have ideas in their head. They have expectations, assumptions that are connected to some interesting mental model about how they think things work, and even what they think might be possible. And if it beeps, well, then those expectations are heightened because they already got some kind of a response. And so, what we started to discover was, as we were watching the video, we would see people push the buttons, we would hear the beep, they would look at the screen kind of funny, seeing little changes in their body language, et cetera, and then they would walk off, and we would interview them. And so, one of the things that we discovered, right, was that what they asked us for, what our clients asked us for, which is people like price check scanners, especially in stores where there's always this rolling markdown of prices, and that's part of the brand of the store, right? So it's a unmitigated positive. That was the easy answer, right? But the really interesting part of this came with the ideas that people talked about when we started to dig around a little bit into what they thought might happen when they push those buttons. And we wound up with a very forward-looking set of ideas that came out of this work, literally just what shoppers thought might be possible through this digital interaction that they were having in the middle of a retail environment. And so that's a bit of a gold mine, right? An unanticipated gold mine. And that's why I like the story, because it really shows that you can get both a variety of very tactical answers to questions that you might have about a prototype, but also introducing something like a button that goes beep or does nothing or what have you is an interesting way to tap into these future-oriented insights about what your customers are ready for and maybe even already expecting from your brand.
Interesting. I got a quick question for you here. So, and knowing that you're primarily focused in this prototype testing, have you, what are some of the benefits that you often explain to your potential clients is, this is the benefit of having something physical, hold in the hand, or in the store, or in the whatever kind of real environment, as opposed to perhaps something more conceptual, maybe written on paper, maybe part of a survey, so people aren't really, it's not confronted and it's not right in front of them. It's, what are kind of the things that you often mention that tell people this is an added value?
Well, two things. I think that anything that goes beyond a word or set of words is incrementally better. And so I would never poo-poo fun sketches on a napkin, right? Or even non-designer type sketches that end users or consumers would do in a co-creation or an ideation session. There can be great things to learn from that, but you wouldn't want to necessarily think about the big process as thumbs up, thumbs down, right? This is not, do we go forward or not? It's what did we learn from this, and how would we incorporate that into the next iteration, right? So that's my caveat to what my answer is. On the other hand, leaving things only in words is a failure mode. And I do this with my clients all the time. I'll say, everybody take out a Post-it note and write this word down on it. And it'll be a word like, here's my favorite one, is collaboration. Okay, so we put the word collaboration up on a whiteboard because, that's where all good ideas land, right, is on a whiteboard with a Post-it note, and it says collaboration. And then what's fascinating is, what does that mean, right? And very often, people will go around and they distill and they come down with this vision of a thing, and it's going to be a collaboration zone or a collaboration technology or whatever it is, right? It's the new standard bearer for what your innovation project is going to be all about. But everybody has a completely different idea of what that means, and they could all be right. But if it was your job to build that thing, you would be way off, probably most of the time. And, when you ask people to write down what they thought it means, for some people, it means, well, we shared writing a document, we passed that document back and forth through email until it was finished, and then we collaborated, and that was the result of our collaboration. For other people, it's literally, we need a bunch of tubers and zots and, fun playthings on a table and lots of whiteboard space, and roll up our sleeves and have some fun music playing in the background. That's collaboration. For other people, it's a conference call, right? So what are you making, right? And if you leave it in the word, there are just certain words, and people love those words because they're kind of sexy and fun and interesting, but they hide more than they reveal. And so the minute you go from a word that's very fuzzy and kind of fun to talk about to something tangible, people go, oh, that's not what I thought you meant, right? And it's horrifying. I've seen, teams walk out of a meeting and come back a month later, and they've all been working on different things because they had one word in their head, and they were taking it in different directions. So visualization is key to success, and the more tangible something gets as you take it from a Post-it note to a napkin sketch to a concept story or a storyboard, all the way through to something that real humans are going to interact with in some capacity, there are multiple opportunities, and they don't have to all be big and expensive. You can do things that are quick and not dirty, right, as long as your expectations are equally adjusted, right, to what you need to get out of it and what you might get out of it if you're lucky. anyway, probably a long answer to your very good short question.
No,
that's really interesting. You'd mentioned co-creation there a little bit, and that's something that I think there's been some speaking of as well in our industry. Can you fill us in a little bit on some of the co-creation, like how you actually harness people and get them engaged on something which may not necessarily be, a really sexy or interesting topic to a consumer, but it's really obviously very important to your client, so that you actually, I guess my ultimate question is, through co-creation, can you unlock the door to greater brilliance than, more of a traditional approach?
I would say the answer is probably yes, and I think that what falls under the bucket of co-creation is also large, right? And so what I've found to be pretty successful in this regard is to get people together in a setting that is, if not real, then at least making a good, solid, playful effort at creating something of an immersion for them to get them into the right cognitive and emotional space. And so we often do co-creation activities with people towards the end of projects where we may have done a bunch of initial fairly open-ended research. We've come up with some general opportunity spaces for our clients to innovate in. And then we might bring end users or consumers in. And what we're probably going to do is, I'll give you an example. We did one on cooking and mixing and measuring and, really basic stuff, right? Like when you think about cooking and baking, mixing and measuring probably has not been innovated in 75 years? I don't know, whoever. It's been a long time, right? It's a very basic kind of a thing. And so getting people to engage with that is an interesting challenge. But we have tremendous visual information because we were in people's homes and we watched them cook. And so we created fairly life-size kitchen environment to bring people into, and we had video stories of people just like them who were talking about how they cooked. And being able to use those research materials as a way to get our new batch of participants into the topic, and having some connection to the challenges, or that, being able to then share their own stories and therefore be in a projective state of mind can be really very effective. I think that the hang-up that a lot of clients have is they think that that's going to produce the idea, right? The one idea, or that there'll be some consensus at the end of these things that yields the brilliance. And I think that's a mistaken expectation. We often follow co-creation events with co-design events. So what you learn in co-creation is often how far your users or consumers are already able to imagine and push beyond. You can learn sometimes what they feel like are barriers, in the sense of like, oh my God, I would never want to go there, kind of a thing. You can learn a lot in the way that they attempt to solve problems and tell stories and imagine things working or not working in their own kitchens or wherever that is. So the ideas that they come up with are actually a set of interesting things that you should tear apart, right? Like, oh, so this is really telling us a story about we have permission to, live on the countertop, right? But we don't have permission to be plugged in, right? We have permission. So you're pulling out of a session like that what I would often call, consumer or user criteria for success, and also like drop dead bozo no-nos for failure, right? And so what that does is that sets up a professional ideation session where you have designers, engineers, market strategy people, et cetera, who roll up their sleeves and say, okay, we learned this from the primary research, we learned this from co-creation. Now what can we do with that? Because that's a tremendous place to start from, as opposed to starting from the Post-it note on the wall.
Mm-hmm. So when you do those co-design sessions, is that also with consumer or the target audience, or is that with like you said, the engineers and the other folks?
It's more internal, exactly. And because you're really working on more tuning of ideas, you're mixing and matching ideas, you're trying to hybridize things and take them in different directions without, you don't want in that scenario a person who's judging the outcome, right? At that point you're really at a moment of trying to push the boundaries in different directions, and often that's best handled by people who are really comfortable with doing that and with the ambiguity involved and looking to drive that, and that can often unfold over weeks, right? You do one session, pull things together, crystallize them, come back again after you've let your brain marinate for a week, do it again, and then often you wind up with some much more refined concepts that have all kinds of really interesting nuance baked into them because you gave it time, right? You took some time in the field to really learn primary things from end users and consumers. You took time with consumers to hear how they would project their own solutions into it. And then you're combining that, of course, with some of the company's own criteria involved, right? It needs to make the magical 100 million, right? Mm-hmm. It needs to keep a certain factory functioning. It needs to, buy supplies from wherever, right? There are all sorts of interesting business criteria. You don't want to spray those all over your consumers and users, mm-hmm. but there is an important moment for them to, play that role.
This might be slightly off topic, but I can sort of almost see the world of cars with infotainment systems is a really fast emerging thing that's happened over the last 10 years or whatever, where even where people put their smartphone when they're driving, you can see the redesign of consoles and dashboards. And the other interesting thing I find is it's very fractured right now. Like each company's approach to the infotainment system and functionality and touchscreen or a knob at the center of the console, they're quite different from each other. So we haven't really got a standardized kind of thing. And I wonder if some of the techniques you've talked about have helped auto manufacturers go along to where they're at now.
I can only imagine that it has. I haven't done any work for big car companies. Happy to do that if they ever want to reach out. But I do think that you're spot on with that. People are innovating in different directions. I think there's an underlying notion in that industry that drivers are going away. And so there's this, so much of this technology is moving so quickly that the sensibility for making really big investments is probably small.
Yeah.
And so here's a funny example of that.
Awesome.
Right? We did a project with a fast food company. This is years ago. You remember when key fobs were all the rage, right? Where you would put your loyalty card from the supermarket, goes on your keychain, it's got a barcode or what have you on it, right? So anyway, this fast food company, they do tons of drive-through business, et cetera, and they wanted people to be able to scan their loyalty card, at the drive-through, because that way they get their discount, they could have their favorite meals already preloaded in there, et cetera, speed everything up, right? Mm-hmm. So, we do a lot of work with this company over the years, and there was this brilliant moment, right, where we've got the key fob, we're giving it to people, we're taking it through the drive-through, and it becomes painfully obvious what a classic epic fail this would be, right? Because where is the key fob?
It's on your keys.
Where are your keys?
In your ignition.
Yeah, right? So, massive investment in key fobs and, all that kind of stuff would have been a horrible idea. And they were able to find that out pretty quickly. But you can push a good idea really, really far in your head without sometimes hitting that, reality moment, right? Where you're like, oh, God, that doesn't make any sense, and sometimes it can go much further than you think, right? It's hard to invest in technology that changes that quickly, because that went to RFID. Yeah. RFID goes to smartphones, So how much are you going to invest in the console of a car and an entire infotainment system if in 5 years half the cars are going to be driverless?
Yeah.
Before investing in a new advertising campaign, you need to know what will work for your brand. At Insightrix Research, we developed our ad testing solution to be the most comprehensive tool for assessing, predicting, and optimizing advertising performance. Insightrix AdCheck is a pre-testing research tool to assess advertising before it's launched via consumer testing to measure and maximize ad effectiveness and purchase intent. Insightrix AdCheck will optimize and enhance your copy and identify the most effective creative to produce and run, allowing you to get the most out of your media budgets by putting your spending behind proven, strong advertisements. Using standardized copy testing measures based on a battery of questions, we can quickly execute your research project, meet tight timelines, and build norms, all within 7 days from start to finish. Insightrix AdCheck survey designs are flexible, and that means we can work with you to accommodate your individual and specific campaign requirements. It costs the same to produce a bad ad as a good one. Early stage pre-testing can ensure your final production costs are invested in the very best creative. To learn more about the Insightrix AdCheck ad pre-testing solution, visit offers.insightrix.com/Insightrix-ad-check or contact Insightrix at info@insightrix.com.
So that actually maybe hits our next question here. I'm just curious about pitfalls you've observed when clients are looking to do the kind of research that you do. What are some things to watch for? Obviously, you mentioned very fast evolving technology can run you out of relevance. But there's sort of key things that you've observed over the years.
Yeah, a few. I have two that are sort of seem contradictory, but well, they might be, but they're still important. So the first one is really not being focused enough on the criteria for success. And I talked about that a little bit. And I mean that as consumer criteria or user criteria for success. Often companies are very focused on their own criteria for success. And as they have to be because they're businesses, right? But they're often glossing over the user side of that. So having a very conscious way of articulating those at the end of any kind of research, I think, is really important. The second one is being overly focused on current functionality, and so that's the story that we talked about with the price check machines, right? So they were obsessed with the price check machines and how they were going to impact today's customers. This fast forward, right, 10 years, all of that is irrelevant, right? But what they could have learned from that, was what their customers, actual customers who were in their actual stores, so not hypothetical customers recruited in a survey, right, or focus groups, but real humans in their stores. What did they, in Oklahoma, okay? So this wasn't in, San Francisco Bay, okay?
Yeah.
This is in Oklahoma, in a small town, all right? They had amazing ideas, right, for what technology could do to help them in an in-store experience. And I'll tell you right now, that company didn't want to hear it. They just wanted the answer, right, to the very limited question of, should we put these price check machines in there or not? So being overly focused on that is bad, right? Assuming your customers or end users are stupid is another really bad one, because they're usually much more forward-thinking, more curious than most of the folks out there that I work with give them credit for. And the last one is just a lack of patience. You brought up quick and dirty. My usual answer to, we just want to do a quick and dirty when a client says that, or a potential client, is that you've come to the wrong firm. Because we really don't do quick and dirty. We can do quick things, relatively quick, but we don't like the concept of quick and dirty. We like quick is good as long as you know how to train it and focus what you are trying to get out of it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Where do you see the future? Maybe that's a two-part question. Have you seen a great deal of evolution since you started in this path in 2001? Perhaps new technology advancements, changing consumer, communication patterns, social media, whatever it's been over the last almost 20 years. What's it look like going forward, I guess, for your business?
Yeah. Dramatic change. It couldn't be any more dramatic. And, when I first started doing this work, pretty much people didn't know what the heck you were talking about if you said ethnographic research or design research. They didn't make any sense in a business context. What you referred to as traditional research, right, was all the rage and got all the money, and there were only a few companies and schools out there that were engaged in this notion of blending strategy, design, and social science research from an observational standpoint or a cultural standpoint in that way. That was a very new thing back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Nowadays, I get RFPs from people I've never met that say they want to do an ethnography. They want a half a dozen unmet needs and crisp insight statements and et cetera. And obviously, it's a bit shocking to see that, right? Because most of them don't really have the experience. Otherwise, they would know you can't guarantee finding a half a dozen unmet needs out there in the world, right? That seems pretty crazy. But that's what I mean. It's gone from something that nobody knew much of anything about, and I would have to really do a lot of explaining just to kind of get in the door, to now people asking for sort of things by name and having a very particular set of expectations around them. So that's been huge. The other part of your question, the technology shift has also been dramatic and does make other things possible. But my big fear is that it's gone in a direction that is probably not healthy in the long run. And my sensibility is that this is a pendulum swing, but hopefully I'll be around to see it swing back the other way. So back in the old days, before there was all this technology, right? If we wanted to engage with people in what we consider a self-documentary technique or approach, we would take disposable actual cameras and create a little journal and put it in a FedEx envelope with a return FedEx envelope and send it out to research participants and ask them to document something in their life. And then they would send it back. And then we might go out and visit them a week later, and they knew a little bit more about us, and we knew a little bit more about them, and it was a great way to get things started. And nowadays, of course, nobody does that. There's all sorts of interesting research platforms where people can log on, they can take pictures and video and self-document almost any aspect of their lives that they can. And I think that's become something of a substitute for people. And that's where I think is the big mistake. It's certainly faster, better, and easier than sending out disposable cameras and sending them back and forth, no doubt about it. But it doesn't fulfill the other really critical part of this work, which is about being present and having an experience alongside your end users or customers, and having all that extra information that you get from being in context. And right now I feel like people are just blowing that part of it off completely. They think, oh, well, I can get 50 people on this research platform, and they can tell me everything I need to know about this prototype or this set of sketches that I sent to them, or what it was like the last time they went to the doctor or riding the bus. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And they feel like that's it. They've got everything they need to know. But they've only really got maybe half the story, and they don't have any of the direct experience, meaning the clients don't, or the design team doesn't, or what have you. They don't have that direct interaction so that they understand things at a more fundamental level. And I think that's a mistake, but things are going that way. And the other really, I think, tragic thing that's happening in our world is just this unrealistic notion that big data solves all, right? And that there's some inherent truth in amassing all this, information that seems to be swirling out there.
Do you find that talk of big data is, being viewed as a potential substitute or a threat to observational research?
Well, there's a finite amount of money right now, right, that people are willing to throw at anything, and big data is the rage. So there's just, wholesale budgets are being shifted inside of companies from one place to another, and in the short term, this is, certainly palpable. In the long term, I think it's not going to be that different than some other experiences I've had with clients. Sometimes I sit down with somebody and they'll push literally a 1.5-foot stack of documents across the desk to me and say, we have all this quantitative data. We know all these things about these people in these segments or what have you. Mm-hmm. But we can't do anything with it. We can't see them as people anymore. Can't talk to them. We can't build something for them, right? We just know all this stuff about them, and it's decontextualized from anything real. And then, you're back out there in the world trying to humanize an endless series of top box scores, right? And that's our mission, right? I mean, that's my mission in life, is to keep the human beings a part of all of this, because otherwise things just go off and I don't know what they become, but it's certainly not pretty.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously we're in a smaller market here in Canada, but over the years I've noticed a surge in sort of qualitative research, and then periods where it cools off and that kind of thing. And I've sort of noticed as of late there's less, I think, appetite for even just your basic focus group or something like that, or even interviews with people. It's more I think, I'm not sure if it's just the investment of time or what it is, but it's interesting to see how things kind of ebb and flow.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know if there's an exact easy place to assign causality or anything to all of this. But like I said, I feel like ultimately these are pendulum swings, and there's a point when people have different needs, and my anticipation is that some of that will come back when people realize that big data doesn't solve all, or maybe even big data sometimes causes big problems. There's a great book called Mass Destruction. Weapons of Mass Destruction. Great book, actually, which details a series of fairly horrifying stories about giant policy decisions that were made based on big data analytics. That can be an issue.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about kind of what are some of the trends and the pendulums and things like that. What do you sort of see as the future? You mentioned that you'd like to see perhaps some of this might sort of swing back, but are there any other alterations in the horizon that could make prototype testing adapt a little bit different, or that kind of thing?
I would love to see some, and I think one of the big opportunities in the world that has not been fully realized is there was a notion years ago when the dot-com boom got started, and it's probably discredited with its bust, but it was this idea of collaborating to compete. And I think that there are tremendous opportunities for big organizations that work together and interact with one another in very interesting ways to conduct research in a joint fashion, so that you're not wasting money and time, and B, you start to acknowledge that there are huge systemic interactions among and between the parts and pieces of our economy and of our behavior and our daily lives, and starting to knit those things together from a research standpoint would actually, I think, promote just a lot more well-being and creating more joy in the world, and trimming probably atrocious amounts of waste. But people are very loath to do that. There's a very few examples of it. We had one really great example where we were lucky. They were both companies were our client, and so it was and they were each other's partners, right? So it worked out really, really well. One of them is a paper products company, and the other is a hospitality company. And so the paper products company had cool new stuff they wanted to test, and the hospitality company wanted to find out whether or not that was going to improve guest experiences. You can't really do testing of new paper products without a real-world hospitality situation to do that in. In the old days, that was people would have to run two separate projects and then try to sell each other on whether or not they were done right. But they wound up talking together, creating a great research project where they shared the insights that came out of it. What a concept, right? Sharing, right? It's just insane, right? They shared what they learned, both about guests and experiences and about the products and the prototypes and things like that. And they had high confidence in the work because they were a part of conceptualizing it. And that's just two companies, right? You think about how many different ways in which our institutions are interconnected, and yet we don't take the time to think about how could we do something together and arrive at a better place rather than everybody often doing their own thing and then trying to smash it together and hope it works.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've kept you for a while here, so I want to just ask one last question though. If somebody wanted to learn more about prototype testing and the techniques that you use to do it, what would be a good place to get started at that?
There's a couple of things that popped into my head. So there are a really decent number of design schools these days, such as like here in Chicago, it's the Institute of Design in Chicago, but there are others, around the country and around the world, and many of them offer executive trainings and workshops and ways to get involved in these sorts of projects, and it's really an inexpensive way for professionals to amp up their understanding and their knowledge about what's possible. And building on that, if that was exciting and they found it valuable, then you can hire interns and graduates from those programs who have skills in behavioral prototyping and, understanding both the research and the design aspects of it and so forth. So I think that's a great way. It's, low cost. It allows for, I think, an exposure to what's new and what's emerging from a technology standpoint, as well as from a research and a real understanding of new product development and new service development, et cetera. And often what I found is that a number of my clients who've done these sorts of things, they wind up becoming more deeply engaged with that community as a whole, because it is really a community. People who are interested in innovation and design research and things like that. So I think that's probably the best way. Obviously, there's books and things like that, but as you can tell, I'm a bit of a freak for getting involved, right? and so I think that ultimately, if you really want to get something into your organization, you're going to have to go there and try it out. Obviously, people could hire us, but I think that wasn't your question. So.
Well, speaking of trying things out, I was actually on your website just recently, and I saw that you've got a new thing called, it's a bit of a quiz. I'm wondering if you can tell me about that really quick.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for that.
It's great.
So, we have a little tab on our website, coniferresearch.com, called Research RX, and really it's a short, semi-fun quiz that helps organizations, companies, what have you, figure out what's the kind of right type of project to support what they're trying to get done. The way we've been looking at it over the years, we really see that there's basically three different kinds of projects. There's ones that are sort of a big fuzzy exploration, and others more about kind of growing what you've got, and the third is really about refinement of concepts or prototypes or things like that. And there's more to it than that. I don't want to bore people to death with it, but the basic idea is that once you have a way to have a conversation between your agency of choice and your company, your organization, a lot of times there's just so much that is hidden in terms of what's needed, how broadly does that need to be shared. There's just all these different kinds of fascinating questions that rarely get packed into an RFP. And a lot of times by the time an RFP is selected, a person is selected to do the work, you're already a week late and you're running down the road. And so this is an interesting way to begin the dialogue by trying to learn a little bit more about each other and how to think about the goals of a project and how that might flow through into the exact methodology that you would choose and what you should expect to come out of the results.
Well, it's a really, really handy resource, and I'll make sure that we've got some information and a link to it so people can check it out on the podcast website.
Super.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on our little podcast. We really had a good time.
Yeah, I did too. I think your efforts and certainly what we try to do in the world is to be as focused as we can on bringing more joy into the world, and encouraging our clients to do the same thing. I guess it's one of my favorite sayings is just more joy, less BS, right? And and it plays out, right? I mean, it's so Puritan and in its approach. There is an obsession. I'm sure you guys have run into it, right? You go do research, and all your clients want to know where the pain points are, right? And it literally is masochistic, right? It's like, just tell me all the ways in which we're hurting people, right? And I can't help but think, like, well, don't you want to know when they smile or laugh or say that was good? Because really that's the good stuff, right? I can't tell you. I can tell you that I have never, ever, in 20 plus years of doing this kind of work, had anyone tell me, I just want to buy the thing that sucks less. Right? Like, just of all the things here on the shelf or in the display, or which one sucks the least, right? Like, because that's the one I want. Right? No, people, you want to make people happy. So if you only think about pain points, you're never going to get to the joy. So I try to tell people, start with the joy. What makes people happy? Focus on that like a laser, and do your best to deliver on that, because that, I think, is the path to success.
Well, right on. Well, we really appreciate you coming on, and really look forward to talking again in the future.
Yeah, thanks, gentlemen. Talk
Anytime.
again soon, Duncan and Lang.
There you have it. I'd like to thank our research director, Lang McGilp, for taking some time out of his busy schedule to lend his expertise to our conversation. And I'd really like to thank Ben Jacobson for coming on the podcast, for sharing his thoughts, ideas, and experience to the episode. While the episode interview was one of the longest we've ever done, I could think we could easily gone another hour. It was so interesting. If you'd like to learn more about Conifer Research and the prototype testing they do, you can find them at www.coniferresearch.com. On their website, you can also check out the Research RX tool that we spoke about earlier in the episode. If you didn't get the URL, we've posted the information on our website with a link at Insightrix.com/podcast. And of course, we'd like to thank you, our awesome and loyal listeners. Without you, none of this would be possible. If you enjoy Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix Podcast, why not take a minute to rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or anywhere else you get your podcasts? It would mean a lot to us, and it helps get the show in front of more people like you, folks with an interest in research. And if you'd like to know more about Insightrix Research, you can check out our website at Insightrix.com, or you can follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We'll be back in another few weeks with another episode of Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix Podcast.